Somewhere between a Depression-era supper table and a 1950s family kitchen, someone decided that dinner needed spikes. So today we are making one of the cutest and strangest old-fashioned dinners I know. Porcupine meatballs. And don't worry, no actual porcupines are involved. These are tender, spiky beef meatballs simmered in tomato sauce. They are part Depression-era meat stretcher, part mid-century family dinner. And if you have ever wondered how a meatball grows spikes, well, today we're going to find out. Hello my friends and fellow Apollonians, welcome back to Apaulo Diner. I'm your host Apollo Jupiter, and today we are going straight into the kind of old-fashioned kitchen magic I love. Simple ingredients, one pan, and a result that looks much fancier, or at least much stranger than it has any right to. It is humble home cooking dressed up in a tiny wildlife costume. Let's get started! We'll start with the body, the meatball mixture. Into a bowl go 1.1 pounds or 500 grams of ground beef. Then we add about 1/3 of a cup or roughly 60 grams of uncooked long grain white rice. Yes, uncooked rice. This is part of what makes porcupine meatballs such clever old-fashioned home cooking. The rice helps stretch the beef, so a simple pound of ground meat becomes a much fuller family meal. And later, while the meatballs simmer in the sauce, that rice cooks right inside. So use plain long grain white rice here. Not risotto rice, not sushi rice, and not short grain pudding rice. They all have their place in life, but that place is not pretending to be tiny quills. Next, we add about 1/4 cup or around 30 grams of very finely grated or very finely chopped onion. I like grating the onion here because it gives you all the flavor but almost melts into the meat instead of leaving big onion chunks behind. Very finely diced works too. Then we add 1 egg, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and if you like, 1/4 teaspoon of paprika. And finally, 2 tablespoons of milk or water, just to help everything come together and keep the meatballs tender. Now we mix this gently by hand until everything just comes together. And gently really is the word here. We are making tender meatballs, not trying to knead this into a punishment. Once the mixture holds together, we can shape it into about 12 medium meatballs. I like making them slightly oval instead of perfectly round because it gives them more of a little animal shape. Somewhere between a porcupine, a hedgehog, and a meatball that has made unusual life choices. Now comes the important part, the quills. We spread about 3/8 of a cup or roughly 60 grams of uncooked long grain white rice on a plate. Then roll the upper half of each meatball lightly in the rice. But don't stop there. Pick up a few extra grains and press them into the outside by hand, especially on the top and sides. If you can, press some of them in at a slight angle so they stick out instead of lying completely flat. This is what gives us the proper porcupine look. You do not need to cover the whole meatball like a breaded cutlet. In fact, it looks better if the rice is a little irregular. A slightly chaotic porcupine is still a porcupine. Once they are shaped and properly spiky, let them rest for about 10 minutes while we make the sauce. That gives the rice a little time to grip the outside. Why our little porcupines rest? Let's have a look at where they came from. The basic idea goes back at least to 1918, when a wartime cookbook called Conservation Recipes included something called rice meatballs, ground meat mixed with rice, onion, and tomatoes. So before these were cute little porcupines, they were already very practical meat and rice meatballs. By the 1940s and 50s, the porcupine name was clearly part of the American kitchen. Hence, tomato sauce advertised rice and beef porcupines, and old printed recipes pointed out exactly what made them fun. As they cooked, the rice swelled up and popped through the surface like little white quills. So this dish really sits at that perfect point between wartime thrift, Depression-era practicality, and mid-century family table charm. Simple ingredients, a modest price tag, and a fun dinner with spikes. Let's move on to our sauce. We start by adding 500 grams or about 2 cups of passata. Basically smooth strained tomatoes to a large skillet. Next, we add 200 milliliters or a little over 3/4 cup of water or beef broth. I like beef broth here because it gives the sauce a little more depth, but water works too. The porcupines aren't that demanding. Then we add 1 tablespoon of tomato paste, 1 teaspoon of Worcester sauce, 1 teaspoon of sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, and some black pepper. Optionally, I also like to add a teaspoon of dried oregano and a little knob of butter. The oregano gives it a little more old-fashioned tomato sauce flavor, and the butter rounds everything out. Now we stir everything together and bring it to a gentle simmer. By the way, if you want the very classic old-school shortcut, many old versions also just used condensed tomato soup with water instead. It was very convenient and right from the school of open a can and dinner is halfway done. But today, this simple sauce gives us the same spirit with a little more control over the flavor. Once the sauce is gently simmering, we carefully place our meatballs into the skillet. And carefully is important here. Do not drop them in like they owe you money. Just place them into the sauce with the spiky side facing up. The sauce should come partway up the sides of the meatballs, but we do not want to completely bury the tops. Because after all that careful quill work, drowning them now would be a small tragedy. And you may notice that we are not browning these first. Usually I love a good sear, but for this recipe browning can knock off the rice and make the spikes much harder to see. So today we're choosing the porcupine look over the crust, a rare case where vanity wins over browning. Now, cover the skillet, turn the heat down to low, and let everything simmer very gently for about 50 to 60 minutes. You want a slow, quiet simmer here, not a tomato volcano. Every 15 to 20 minutes, you can check the sauce. If it gets too thick, just add a splash of water or broth. You can gently spoon a little of the sauce around the meatballs, but try not to stir them aggressively or flip them around. The less we butter them, the better they keep their shape. And as they simmer, the rice inside becomes tender, while the rice on the outside swells up into those little white quills. After about 50 minutes, you can cut one meatball open and check the rice inside. It should be fully cooked and tender. If it is still a little crunchy, cover the pan and give it another 5 to 10 minutes. This is not the moment for impatience. A crunchy porcupine is nobody's friend. Once they are done, the meatballs should be tender, the sauce nicely thickened, and the outside rice puffed up into little quills. Now we serve them carefully with a spoon, because they are still delicate. For the most classic mid-century dinner table look, I like serving them with mashed potatoes and peas. But good old egg noodles work beautifully too. Let's spoon some sauce onto the plate first. Place 2 or 3 meatballs on top and add a little more sauce around the base. But don't cover them completely. After waiting almost an hour for these little fellows to grow quills, we're not hiding them under a tomato blanket. Time for a taste. Delicious. It's soft, cozy, tomatoey, and the rice gives it this funny little texture that makes it feel more interesting. Of course, the spikes are the best part, not because they change the flavor that much, but because dinner is simply even more enjoyable when it looks like it has a tiny defensive strategy. And maybe that is the lesson here. Sometimes all a humble little meatball needs is the confidence to be a porcupine. And that, my friends, is how you make classic porcupine meatballs. A wonderfully odd little dinner from the old American kitchen. Practical, comforting, and just strange enough to earn its place here at the diner. If you enjoyed this recipe, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out my other vintage recipes right here on Apaulo Diner. And let me know in the comments, have you ever tried porcupine meatballs, or is this your first encounter with dinner spikes? Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next episode.